Ty, so glad to have you on.
Hey, thank you, man.
Thanks for joining me.
Oh, yeah. Thank
very,
you.
Very excited to hear about what you have to say. And you and I first met about a year ago, and you came up to me with a lot of really positive energy, and it's very easy to be friends with you, and you're a very good dude. And I've gotten to know you over the past year. We've gone golfing a few times, and found out a little bit about your background and history, and your family migrated to America right after the Vietnam War, or maybe during it. We can get into that. But you have a fascinating story, and that all happened when you were a little boy, and really I just wanted to give you the platform and the airwaves to talk about your story. And I want you to start just from the beginning.
Sure. First, thank you very much for making this platform available.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I go and talk to various schools many years ago, or just sitting one-on-one with coworkers, tell stories, and pretty much everyone says, I should put this down on a book or somewhere. I don't feel like my story is that unique, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of people were part of the boat people. My intent today is really just to share my personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get into like the statistics and all that stuff, but I'm 50 years old now. But when I was about 9, almost 10, and that's a little debatable, our family escaped. Most of our family escaped from Vietnam.
And what year was this?
1978.
Okay.
So essentially, it started as, the Vietnam War ended officially on April 30th, 1975. And a lot of people left during that time, or right before that, including my uncle. For whatever reason, my family stayed. I didn't understand, and I was literally like 5, 6 years old. The 2 times that I saw my father cried was in probably May 1, May 2, in 1975. He was holding my hand, walking me back to our house, because when the war was declared over on April 30th, there were still some sporadic shootings and all that stuff. It's not like now where you can Instagram and broadcast that. Back then it was word of mouth and all that stuff. So there were still, I call it sporadic fighting. And we walk back, and I see people getting shot right in front of me. We were dodging, literally bullets, and people were just randomly shooting each other.
Was there any reason?
Literally, there was like 2 sides are still fighting, but whatever declaration that was signed, like in Saigon, now called Ho Chi Minh City, things don't make it out until days and hours later. Anyway, my dad and I got back to our house, and he just sat there and he cried. So that kind of scared me a little bit, because I've never seen him cry before. Anyway.
And what was your family's business?
There are several, but the main business is mahogany wood. We just go into the jungle and harvest mahogany wood and sell it. And so that's how we made a lot of it. But there are a couple of tangents in there regarding, my family business, and I'll get into it in a moment. But from 1975, we existed, and somehow we were insulated, and I found out why we were insulated from the communist rule. With communism, the state owns everything. You're not supposed, an individual cannot own private property unless you bribe them. And so my mom and my dad bribed some people to allow us to own business still. But at some point, the system was going to fall on its face because of greed, just basic human greed. And I don't want to get into the politics of it, but communism on its face, it's very nice, and it sounds like it could work
In theory.
But in reality, it just doesn't. And so we stayed behind, and my dad's view after the war was that we were so powerful, so rich, that no one was going to touch us. And so that's why we literally stayed, and we kept on going for a few years. I live in a big compound. When I say compound, there's like the main house where my parents live, there's a maid. Um, there's a back of the house, which is all the five boys. We live there, and we have a maid to take care of us. We have a guest house. Um, my recollection was it's about a 5,000 square foot guest house. And then we have a tennis court, badminton courts inside, all these walls. Most of the time, we don't really go anywhere because there's so many people come into our compound. And when you're little and that's all that was normal. So there are all these friends, if you will, show up and play with us. And there were cars and maids, and we never have to lift a finger to cook and clean or anything like that. So as a kid, you're trained to believe in that, and this is how it is normally. I never really got to see the real world of Vietnam, which was a lot of poverty. So anyway, we stay there, and I didn't realize, my parents go into the jungle, and back then the roads are not that secure, and back then the telephone lines were not so secure. So they alternate. My dad would go into for work for 3 weeks at a time, or 2 weeks, whatever it is, and then he would come back, and my mom would go out. Well, as it turns out, the way it works is the roads can be blown up because there are still literally people, the communists, the North Vietnamese soldiers were still fighting because some of them were still in the jungle, never heard the news. So they would blow up the roads, blow up the bridges. And so my mom or dad could be stuck out in the jungle. And then until they rebuild the little bridge, whatever it is, and then that's when they come back. Anyway, for various reasons, there are always these warlords that take care of an area, and they're assigned because they were, they did some things that the president, new prime minister says, you get to control this area. He would then have his own minions and lieutenants go collect money from everybody, like literally back in the feudal system in England, everyone's got to pay taxes. Well, the guy in the front line been faithfully collecting X amount of money. I think this time he just got greedy and put my dad in prison, thinking that by doing that, they can take over the business and, take over the property and the business. What they don't realize is that in my family, my mom is really one that runs the business, and my dad was the big picture guy. And so while my dad was in prison, my mom was still running the business, and the business did not fail. So anyway, basically from that point when he was put in, they call it re-education camp. It's a way to kill people. My mom was able to bribe some folks and get them out of prison. And that took a number of months of negotiation. Once my dad was released, the decision was we are now touchable. Before that, we were untouchable. Once he got out, nursed himself enough. He was about 5'4" and maybe about 70 pounds. That's all he weighed. When we picked him up, I actually ran away from him because it was a bag of skin and bones, and I didn't know that was my dad. It was literally we're picking up a boogeyman.
How long was he in there?
For about 3 months. Basically, they shackle you in a metal box, and so at night it's cool, and then during the day it gets really hot, and you're laying down, strapped, spread eagle, and then you get one crappy rice bowl a day, 3-4 day old rice, and then you get a little sprinkle of salt. That's all you get to eat. So he was literally shrinking. But anyway, to move forward, he regained some health, and then he was then plotting to how do we get out and get away from this, because if this happened once, it's going to continually happen again. now that they know that they can extort more money from out of you. Just give you the audience an idea. With the Communist Party, the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, they would just show up and they said, "We want that. Whatever they want, they're gonna get." And you don't really have a choice to say
Maybe a
yes
building,
or no.
a business.
Yeah, we want that pot, or we just want this. Whatever they want, they get.
And you were on the North Vietnamese side.
We were living in South Vietnam, but now that the country is all communist, run by the North Vietnamese, basically. We were just basically subjects now. We are basically slaves to them. And so whatever they want, they take from you, and it gets to be very oppressive. I don't know a lot of, I call it the adult theme versions, but I'm sure there were many women were raped and taken away and part of human trafficking and all that. But I do know that, like, for example, one of the difficult things that when I got to become 18 years old and sworn in as a U.S. citizen, they asked me, have you ever been a part of a Communist Party member? And I just stunned. I just sat there and, do I lie? Which is say no, because I know if I say yes, there'll be a whole bunch of other directions that goes on. Because in Vietnam back then, they basically pointed a gun at you and say, you want to be Uncle Ho. Ho Chi Minh is the leader of the Communist Party.
Okay. So your dad gets out of prison.
Yeah.
He's obviously distraught.
Right.
And no longer untouchable. And so you guys collectively as a family make a decision to...
It was, I think it was more like my mom and dad made the decision to escape. I had no idea what was going on. And what I got was on March 15th, 1978.
Okay.
That morning, my dad said, "You're not going to school. We're going to go on vacation. So don't go to school." And being whatever, 9 years old roughly, yay, you know what I mean? And we just stayed at home. And then later on that day, there was a car pull up and we all shoved into it. And we drove to this beach house and we just stayed there and hang out with a whole bunch of other people. That was an impression of what happened. What I found out was that morning, my dad knows the boat owner, the fisherman, and the fisherman says, basically, we're escaping today. You want to go, yes or no? And here's the fee. And it was a lot of money. And so my dad would then, okay, I'll be right back to pick up whoever's at the house. So at the house was me, my 4 other brothers, my dad, and my aunt, my uncle, and a family doctor who lives with us. Because, you have to basically rely on yourself. You can't go to the hospital. You go to the hospital to die. No one really treats you. So the 9 of us got on in the car and drove to this beach house, and we waited until night falls. And then my dad said, we're going to go on vacation, and your mom will join us afterwards when we get there. So being 9 years old and seeing a whole bunch of other kids running around, and so it was great. Didn't really understand that we were escaping on this small fishing boat. My dad said it was about 35 meters, and so he converted. That's probably 140, 150 feet long and about 40 feet wide. Many days later, I found out that there were 179 people on that boat. It's not a very big boat at all for 179 people. In fact, I was sitting on the side of the boat when it was in the morning, and the outside leg, I was straddling the side of the boat. My outside leg was touching the water. That's how low the boat was laden down with people. For whatever reason, miraculously, we all got on the little canoe to get us out to the fishing boat. Literally, there's a ferry that goes back and forth. And when I say ferry, people were sneaking out by a small canoe to get to the big boat and go back to pick up more people. And then once we get everybody on board, we snuck out at night. There's no compass. It was dark, and I was sent into the holding tank where the fish and all that stuff were stored. It smelled. Peyton, it was disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
I remember people vomiting all over each other. We were crammed in, but with the swing, of the ocean, being inside, and the smell of a holding tank for fish, which has never been clean. You know what I mean? So it was pretty rough. But luckily, by morning, I was able to go up above and just kind of get some fresh air. And we rotate around. There wasn't a lot of room to walk around. You just get up above and you just sit there. Ho Chi Minh, or Vung Tau, is my hometown. It's right around the 12th parallel. The equator obviously is 12 degrees below that. And we were heading towards Malaysia, which it gets hotter and hotter. And can you imagine being on a boat that could easily capsize? There are a number of dangers, including bad weather. There are modern pirates who know that the people are escaping to Malaysia, to Singapore and Indonesia. What they do is they rape the women, kill the men, take all the possessions. There are military, naval boats or patrol folks. They work for the government, but they behave the same way. Rape the women, kill the men, take all the possessions. Luckily for us, after basically 3 nights and 2 days, we encounter a naval carrier, a U.S. naval ship.
On your way to Malaysia.
On my way to Malaysia.
How far is where you took off in Vietnam to Malaysia?
If you go straight as the crow flies, it's roughly 700 miles. But Malaysia is just a long string of islands, so pick one, right? But let's say if you go straight south, it's about 700 miles. We floated for a day and a half because we ran out of fuel. It's not like you buy unlimited amount of fuel. The guy, literally the boat owner, would over many months hoard away, 10 ounces here, 5 ounces there, to get enough fuel to get him offshore. And then from then on, you're hoping that someone will pick you up. I mean, a friendly, not a pirate, not a Vietnamese government boat. So in our case, we were so lucky that a U.S. naval ship encounter slowed down, gave us food, gave us fuel, and gave us a compass. They couldn't take us on board because a naval ship has to be ready for battle. I think there were like 13 or 15 naval ships, like naval carriers, worldwide. You know what I mean? So they're supposed to be patrolling, be ready. They pointed that way. So once we just got enough food and fuel, we went to Malaysia, which they basically, we came up on this little fishing area village, and we said, hey, however people communicate. I was so little, just watching people pointing, arms waving, whatever it is. They just told us basically to go away. But they didn't hold us. They didn't kill us. So to us, that's a sign that we reached friendly territory, if that makes sense. So we went back out to sea a little bit, and we went down the shore, and we waited until the low tide, meaning that to be taking effect. The captain would just ram the boat onto shore and made everyone run out and run towards the shoreline. And then by the time the police were called and all that, the water has receded maybe 200 yards. The boat was completely out of the water. So now the Malaysian, which we found out it was Malaysia, we didn't know what country it was, had to take us on. So now we were sent to Pulau Bidong. Bidong is a name of an island where they put all the Vietnamese boat people, the refugees. So it's a very small island, and that's where we were processed. And so we were waiting there, mass confusion. No one really speaks English.
Is there a government building? Is it?
There's a shack, and it turns out the United Nations and some other, I call it World Health Organizations people, were processing people. with the Vietnamese people and documenting, okay, who's what and all that stuff, how many people in your family and all that.
How big was that island?
I think if you look on a map, it's like about I call it 2 or 3 square miles. So it's not very big. It's an isolated little island, and it's not like a resort. So we literally would live on whatever thatch roof that we can make, planks of wood that we can, harvest. Every day you go into the woods to go potty and pee. You have to collect wood to burn, to boil water so that you can drink. Many people died in the refugee camp because they got lazy by drinking, let's say, the well water, and which is not really potable. But the funny story that comes out of all this though is, as we get processed, a whole bunch of people, French and Americans were trying to ask in Vietnamese language, what's your name? And in Vietnam, we say the last name, middle name, first name. So in America, it's the first name, middle name, last name. And so there's a whole bunch of confusion. There are people that I know, their names were Noni, because somebody put down none, N-O-N-E, because they couldn't make out whatever they're saying. Mm-hmm. And so the paperwork got processed, their name is Noni, but it's really meant none. Mm. So luckily, my name, last name is Hong, first name is Thai. And then they asked me what my birthday was. And my dad said, I was born in 1968 during the Tet Offensive War. So that much I knew. But then after that, I didn't have a piece of paper. And so they
or an exact day.
Or an exact day. So
just this period of time.
Right. Because Tet Offensive is a big celebration in Vietnam. Tet, T-E-T, Tet is Chinese New Year. And it goes by the lunar calendar. On my left temple here, there's a thumbprint. My mom was in labor back in 1968. She couldn't run anymore. So the family doctor I told you that stayed with us.
Because it was during the war.
Yeah, during the war, or the start of the war. Pulled me out, and so his thumbprint is here. His pinky is over here. So I had 2 open marks. You can see one right here, but this one, my hairline receded a little bit, so you don't see it anymore. Anyway, so I was born roughly 1968. And this is an interesting aside. When you're born, you're 1 year old, because supposedly you've been alive for 9 months. Mm. In America, you're born and you're starting at 0, right?
So the war's going on. Your mother is panicked. She's been running away.
Yeah, just avoiding bombs.
Avoiding bombs. She's like, I can't run with this baby anymore. So you have the local doctor reach in, pull you out.
Yep, the family doctor, yes.
Prematurely.
Yep.
And you still have the marks to show it.
Right.
Amazing.
And so, anyway, going to the immigration now, basically, they're like, well, if you don't tell them a date in a piece of paper or whatever. So the date I got processed was March 20th, 1978. So telling them that I was born in 1968, so my official birth date, Peyton, is March 20th, 1968. It's a fictitious date, but anyway, but it gets the job done.
It makes you younger. Yeah.
So my wife actually looked up, and if I were to be born on Tet, which is Chinese New Year, 1968, on that day, if I were, my actual birthday would have been January 30th. But anyway, semantics aside. So we waited, and we were there for about almost 3 full months. You get 1 meal a day, and then you just kill time. And every day.
And what are you waiting for?
Waiting to be processed.
Okay.
So I don't want to get political, but this tells me, and it hopefully tells you and everybody else listening to this, for all the warts, for all the things that are not right with America, it is still the greatest country to me. It is still the greatest country to most people in the world, because of the 179 people that were on the boat after 48 hours of quarantine and processing. Literally, we're right there, and they said, okay, you have a chance to go right now to Australia. Who wants to go? There'll be 1 or 2 people who say, yeah, we'll go. And then go next. Who wants to go to Canada? Nobody. Who wants to go to France? Because of the French influence, there'll be a handful of people go. Who wants to go to Finland? Who wants to go to Norway? Nope, nope, nope. Who wants to go to America? The rest of the 170 people out of 179 raised their hand and said, yeah, we want to go to America. That's the Holy Grail. So for all the things that are wrong with America today or many years ago, it is still the beacon of hope. And I firmly believe in that. Anyway, so the United States could only accept so many people a year because you can't just have a mass entry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back then it was like 7,500 people a year, and then it got increased to 15,000 a year. But there was a clause in there where if there's a relative in the United States that can help acclimate, then you get preferential treatment. Well, it turns out my uncle fought against the North Vietnamese Army. So he helped, enlisted and helped the U.S. soldiers. And when you volunteer to help like that, when the United States pull out, they would actually try to pull out those people who volunteer to help. Otherwise, if you don't help those people, the next war you go into, no one's going to volunteer, meaning like the Iraq War and all that stuff.
So the U.S. government remembered that your uncle helped them out.
Yes. So they pull him out in 1975. And so they asked, and my dad said, hey, there's an uncle. I have a younger brother. He's somewhere in the United States. And so they scour and they search and they located him. He was living in St. Paul, Minnesota. Because there are only so many last names. It's not like in America where you have literally a plethora of last names. And let's say you get married and you and your wife decide, you know what, we're not going to hyphenate, we're not change names, we're going to make a new name. You can do that. Where in Vietnam, literally, there are like 39 last names. That's it.
That's it.
So it's easy to say, hey, where's another Hong? And so they located him and confirmed that he's there. So then we jumped the line. We literally could have been in the refugee camp for 5 years, 7 years. There are families that lived there for 15 years in the refugee camp. Children were born in the refugee camp, just because you have to wait your time, because when you have 800,000 people roughly escaped,
and being processed.
Yeah. And then in the meantime, you have a quota of, let's say, 7,500 a year in the United States. Do the math. You just got to wait your time unless there's some other intervening circumstance, like an uncle or relative who can help you acclimate, because that's really important. So they've located him, and he somehow was connected to, around the area. And there's a lady whom I still am in contact with. She was a 23 graduate student. She wanted to sponsor a Vietnamese boat people, refugee family, as part of her master's thesis. So they connected and went through a church, which is a Lutheran church, to help provide some financial support. And that's how we were able to get out of the refugee camp in just under 3 months. Peyton, I could have been there, like I said, for 10 plus years. But luckily, by July 1, we were able to get on a plane and make many stops and then got to Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so the story goes from there is on the 4th of July, they took us to Loring Park in Minneapolis and said, hey, we're going to go watch fireworks today. And that's great. And I remember my dad scaring the crap out of me. He huddled the 5 boys together and he looked at us, and he had I told you the 2 times that he cried. The first time is 1975. He didn't exactly cry, but he was shaken. He said, we're going to die. We're going to die. I did the best I can for you guys, but we're going to die. And so being 9, 10 years old, I kind of started crying, and I looked at my older brother. I saw my dad walking away, beaten down, shoulders slumped and head facing down, So my brother explained to me that the reason why we're going to die is, he said, look around you. Everyone's walking around T-shirts and shorts. We have turtlenecks and sweaters. This is summer. Winter's coming. And we're going to die when winter comes. Not because someone's gonna kill us, put in a re-education camp, but because the weather. Because the Minnesotans were so hardy. You know what I mean? It could be 60 degrees and they're out in shorts. It could be 40 degrees and they're shoveling snow in shorts. You know, but the people in Minnesota were so nice. Took us in basically, tacitly or openly. Welcomed us.
Did you know any English?
No.
Did any of you guys?
None. Yeah, none of us knew any English. There is some magic to learning another language when you're younger. So my younger brother and I, we adapted much quicker than my three older brothers. We're about 2 years apart. And you just literally, I've never seen an African American, a black person ever in my life. Well, I finally been exposed to it when I came to Minneapolis. Because up until that point, the only people in America that I know were from the Sears catalog, and everyone's so beautiful. And then so I'm seeing all kinds of ethnic backgrounds and colors, shapes, sizes. It was, like I said, a lot to take in.
I'm sure you saw more obese people here.
Yes. But the good thing about all that is it didn't really matter because no one was suppressing us, holding a gun to us, making us do things. And so just trying to adapt and figure out what's going on. So as we learn English, and English, by the way, is one of the harder languages to learn. As much as people think, oh, well, Americans, hey, English, that's easy. So you try to figure out there is a breadcrumb to everything, right? So in Vietnamese, there are accent marks everywhere. So that tells you literally that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. Well, when you go to church, which starts with a CH, right? You go to church. Isn't the chore singing? So why is it a choir? So how do you know when it's a CH sound, kind of like a J sound versus a K sound? Or you want to speak English, but you're going to eat a steak. Well, shouldn't it be a steak? So these are the things you're trying to figure out, and literally you just got to learn, figure it out, a kernel of corn versus a kernel in the army, and all these things. Why do you drive on a parkway, but you park on a driveway? And all these things, you question everything, and you just scratch your head. And after a while, some of the older folks, Vietnamese folks now, and I'm sure other immigrants too, they have a hard time adjusting because, like I said, there is a linear process to learning things. But with English, it was just a whole bunch of, yes, it's rooted in Latin, but there's a whole bunch of, I call it, Americanism that you just have to know.
Yeah.
But we learned to adapt to the winter. Took a bus. There are schools that specialize in, they call it magnet schools, ESL, English as a secondary language. So, like, there's a neighborhood school that I could have walked to, but they didn't have that program. So I had to take a walk, literally a mile, to the bus stop to go to school and learn English, But then one of the great things about the world is math. 1 + 1 is 2. It doesn't matter what country. So it was very easy for me to pick up. So I was in advanced math right away. I still don't understand how this whole thing, like, a foot, 3 feet is a yard, you know what I mean? And all that stuff where in the metric system, everything's by 10.
Yeah.
But anyway, we went to school. And then I think for the first 2 years, I basically became Americanized pretty quick. Where my father was still stuck. Now, to give perspective, my father and my mom were on the high end of the totem pole in Vietnam. We were one of the wealthiest families in Vietnam. To 1978, we came to America. He had very little English. He had a 3rd grade education, really no training. So he is basically pretty much at the bottom of the totem pole. He could get a job working maintenance. So at a church, so it's Augustana Lutheran Church. That church is still there. He would literally paint the windowsills to earn some money. But then there's only so many windows. So then after that, the church said, we don't have any more money to pay you. So now this is October
Of what year?
of 1978.
Okay.
So about 3 months after we got to America. The second time my father cried was the first and only welfare check. That came.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was so ashamed. He was not going to take government handout. He never went to the grocery store because someone was handing him out money. So that was the second time I saw him cry.
Mm.
Anyway, so from that point, that was the only welfare check our family ever received.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm proud to say this, but we all pretty much lied about our ages,
Mm-hmm.
and we all went to work.
Mm.
So I was 10. I lied that I was 13 so that I can deliver newspapers. My younger brother, he was 8, but he was also 13, deliver newspapers. My 3 older brothers lied that they're 16 years old so they can wash dishes and do whatever it is, but we were not going to take a welfare check. And so we learned to live within the confines of the new place, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can go to pretty much every mile and there's a sushi restaurant and there's all kinds of rice and ethnic restaurants. You know, you and I went to eat, pho the other day, but back in 1978, you eat American food, what Scandinavians eat, which is potatoes and all that stuff. So
It was like being on a different planet for you.
yeah, we ate literally pork chop because it was cheap and it's a form of filling food. We bought rice and we ate rice every day. And the only variation of my meal for 6 months was either iceberg lettuce or chopped up cucumber. So it was pork chop, white rice, and again, iceberg lettuce or pork chops. And that's all we knew how to make. And for 6 months, that's the only meal we ate every day. So to this day, my friends and my wife will always amazed that I can eat the same thing over and over and over. Those formative days and years really set a footprint and hardened my DNA to this day. I saved everything. I reuse a napkin, until it's not usable anymore. I have a brown paper bag that I would, carefully fold up, save, and bring home, and then use it again the next day. I saw all the other kids at school where they just crumple it up and toss it away. Anyway, we basically, as weird as that may sound, from 1978 to 1980, we literally lie, cheat, not cheat in the sense of cheating people money, but we just lied about our ages and we shoveled snow. We did whatever we could.
Yeah, whatever
to
it
pay
takes.
rent.
Mm-hmm.
We literally don't have any excess money at all. There's no like candy bar that we're gonna eat and buy, and none of that. Ride the bus everywhere or ride a bike. And I learned to ride the bike in Minnesota winter. I delivered newspapers in Minnesota winter, to a point where we were able to save enough money to actually buy a duplex up in Coon Rapids, Minnesota, which is a suburb in the north. So after about 2.5 years of living in basically government housing, in a very poor neighborhood, we somehow scraped enough money together to put the down payment on a house, and then we moved to the burbs. Although it was good in one way, it's bad in another way because we didn't have a car, so there's less public transportation in the suburbs. So I learned to ride a bike again in the winter. It could be 12 below. snow everywhere, but I'm going to ride in the middle of the road to go to school, go to work at Hardee's or, restaurants or whatever. But it was tough times,
Yeah.
but it was better than what we had
Right.
in Vietnam. I look back, like I said, I'm 50 years old now. My dad was around 44 years old when he made the decision to escape from Vietnam. And I wonder, could I have made that decision? And I have to give you some perspective here, because in 1979, I'm going back now, Vietnam got into a war with Cambodia.
In 79.
In
So they
1979.
wow.
But we escaped in March of 1978, not knowing what was going to happen in the future. Had we stayed and had we not escaped Peyton, we would have, my three older brothers would have been drafted and gone to war, because they were so many people. About 2 million soldiers were killed in the Vietnam War. Well, in this country, we call it the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, it was called the American War. So in 1979, they would have drafted my three older brothers to go shoot somebody, across the border in Cambodia. So as that tells you how dire the situation was in Vietnam. And so for all the things that are not right with America, it's still better than what we had. And so now, we learn to live and go get an education and do a lot of these things that I would say many of Vietnamese people don't have. During the 1975, after the war, to maybe 1985, 83, roughly about 2 million people try to escape by foot or by boat. About 800,000 survive. So that's a lot of people perished in that process. So there's a kind of a fun story I like to tell you. My wife goes to a nail salon to get her nails done. And of course, invariably, it's owned by a Vietnamese family. I say this because I laugh. I don't know why Vietnamese people keep owning all these nail salons. But so one day she went up to the guy and said, "Hey, how do you say, shit in Vietnamese?" Because she likes to use that word. And he goes, "Well, one, why would you want to know? And we don't really swear like that." I said, "Well, I'm dating a Vietnamese guy." I was like, "Oh, well, bring him over. I'd like to talk to him." So when people say from Vietnam, when people say stuff like that, they could be anywhere. And they could have been like, oh, visited, Vung Tau, which is a resort town or whatever. But anyway, I met him and I started talking to him, and the way that we were talking. And then he said he's from my hometown, which is Vung Tau. And then he started describing the house that he used to go hang out.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Incredible.
It was my house.
Do you remember him as a little boy?
No.
No.
We now live 3 blocks apart in South Overland Park.
Wow.
So
what are the chances of that?
So he escaped in when you escape, you don't write a letter.
Right.
You just go. And then when people don't see you, that's when they know, oh, okay, well, they escaped. And then his family got relocated, of all places, in Manhattan, Kansas. And then somehow, in a roundabout way, he relocated into Kansas City. And now he and we live 3 blocks apart.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing how literally 2 kids split apart and then come back together.
So whatever happened to your mother?
So my mom was away in business. And we, like I said, they go for 2-3 weeks, a month at a time, depending on the road conditions.
She was one really running the whole family business.
Right.
And,
yes.
and the Vietnamese government thought it was your dad.
Correct. Because believe it or not, it's a common theme, right? The women were not well educated, not expected to be business savvy and all that. My mom was the opposite of that, and she's the one that ran it. And so she was away on business. and this is the gory part of the escape. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're the boat owner, and you save enough fuel, and you know enough people, and you want to say, hey, you want to escape. And let's say you know me, and let's say you know another guy, and it's like, we're going to escape. Yes or no? If I say no, you, the boat owner, now have a difficult decision. Are you going to kill me so that I don't turn you into the authorities to get a reward? Or are you going to tie me up, you know? So it's a very tough proposition. And it's not like, oh, okay, we're going to plan. We're going to tell everybody who's going to go. And then we're going to, 2 weeks later, we all congregate here. It's escape right now, yes or no? And that's why I said my dad went back home and said, I'll be right back, pick up the people in the house. So like I said, 5 boys, dad, aunt, uncle, family doctor, 9 of us got on that boat.
It sounds like the Nazis.
So there was no waiting for my mom, whatever. I presume there's a letter that says, hey, we have a chance to get the kids out. So I you know, I don't know what my mom, I can only imagine her reaction when she comes home and find out there's a note or there's nobody left. And how do you know, human spirit wise, just continue to live on. And there was really no communication between my mom and us because it's back in the day. There's no emails, there's no phone calls, you know, like now no one really thinks about long distance phone calls. You know, you just type an email or you FaceTime and Facebook and whatever it is that people do nowadays. So whatever letter we write, if it gets to her, it gets to her. It doesn't, it doesn't. And, you know, it's snail mail is what we call it. So I really was missing my mom. And I remember crying a lot when I was during those first 6 months, for sure, a year. And our lifestyle was a lot different. I want to go back to Vietnam. I didn't know why that's a bad place, because here I was. I live inside a compound with a tennis court, with badminton and ping pong tables and maid service and all that stuff. I have my own rooms. The guest house is bigger than the house I was living in. Here I am. I have a double bed. I'm sharing a double bed with my dad. And then my 4 other brothers, we all split up. It's a 3-bedroom, whatever, duplex. And it's
Minneapolis.
cramped. Yeah, in Minneapolis. And it was just cramped. And we live basically in, I call it a very rough neighborhood, broken glass everywhere. Like you don't hang out at night at all. You shutter, you lock up, and people fight and broken glass. People screaming, fighting all the time. I just want to go back. So it was a tough time. And I'm sure it was tough for my dad too, to having to basically figure out when the next paycheck, if you will, comes, to now dealing with crying kids. You know, most fathers in Vietnam are not meant to be nurturers. And so it's a completely different role for him. So I don't, and, you know, I can only imagine how bad it was for my father, you know. But because I was a little kid, all I think about was, hey, I want to go back to my mom, and I didn't worry about where the next meal comes from and all that. Anyway, I had this vision of going back to see my mom. And so when I graduated from Coon Rapids High School in 1986, I didn't take the PSAT, SAT, ACT, nothing. I had $782 to my name. That was a lot of money back in 1986. And I was all set to go to Vietnam and go see my mom. And my aunts, my uncles, my dad, none of it. He's like, don't do it, don't do it. But I was all set to go. So they finally said, look, why don't you go talk to this guy? His name is Stephen Young. He was the dean at Hamlin Law School in St. Paul, Minnesota. I didn't know this, but he married a Vietnamese woman, and they were family friends. But I was so little, I didn't really know who he was. Stephen was a Caucasian dude who married a Vietnamese woman. So I went to see him. And I said, look, I want to go visit my mom. And then, I don't know why it never occurred to me before, but the way he said it in Vietnamese to me was, don't be stupid. Your parents sacrificed for you to be here. You have a high school education, more education than a whole bunch of other school teachers and people in Vietnam. There is no diplomatic relationship between the United States and the Vietnamese governments right now. If you get caught, you'll be stuck there, and all their sacrifice will be for naught. So, go to school. When things get better, then you can go back. It never occurred to me to think of it that way because, again, I was young and stupid. I broke down and I cried, and I just realized that, well, there's a smarter way of doing this. So I left the office. I remember sitting on Hewitt Avenue and Snelling Avenue on the bus bench and just crying. My body was convulsing. And people come by and say, hey, how are you going? You know, and I was just crying so hard. There was a gentleman, and he happens to be the head track coach at Hamlin University, Mr. Kent Staley. He recognized me because he saw me pole vaulting in high school. So there aren't too many Vietnamese people or Asian people pole vaulting. There aren't too many pole vaulters, period. So being 5'5", 130 pounds, but I was really good at it. So I was memorable to him. So he pulled me aside and he asked me, and of course I just spilled my guts and I just told him what happened. Now, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's many years now, so it's been almost 40 years. So I don't think Hamlin University is going to ever take my diploma away or go back to it. But basically, the admission had closed in January of that year, and this is late June of 1986. So he somehow got the school admissions to admit one more student, and he got me to basically backfill a few things, like take the PSAT, SAT, ACT, and hopefully I got enough points, score to fit into the profile so I can enter the school. And I did, thankfully. And then it was $13,250 a year back in 1986. And again, if anyone watches this and report me to Hamlin University, well, good luck. But somehow he cobbled enough funding from various boosters to pay for my first year.
Wow.
We didn't have any money. We were so poor already. Like I said, we scraped enough money to go get out of tenement housing, government housing, into a duplex in the suburbs of Coon Rapids, Minnesota. But we didn't have like thousands of dollars, and my dad was not in a position to pay for schooling, especially at a private school. But from that point on, I entered school, and then I made a plan. It was international management and Japanese studies. For some of the older folks, Japan was going to take over the world back in the 80s. And so I thought that was a great way for me to basically travel. And that's how I'm going to go see my mom. So that was my plan. Most people take 4 classes. I took 5. I worked about 55 hours a week, a whole bunch of odd jobs. On the weekends, I wake up, get to a factory at 6 a.m. and get out at 5 p.m. working at Twin City Bottle. They make prints on your mugs and glasses, whatever. I literally worked. I had no social life. I graduated in 3 years with a double major, and then I went to Japan in 1989. Got there on August 7th. And my plan was, once I get to Tokyo, I was going to fly to Hong Kong and go to Vietnam and go see my mom.
Were you, okay, before you get into that, were you pole vaulting at Hamlin?
Yeah, yes, well.
Kind of.
Kind of.
And you're on scholarship?
Not really,
Not
because
really.
it's a Division III, there's no athletic scholarship. Right. But again, this is where Mr. Staley somehow cobbled enough money and got me in.
So you're in Japan now?
So now I'm in Japan, and
after you graduated?
After graduating, I graduated in 3 years. So most people go there, study abroad the junior year, and come back for the senior year. I graduated already, and then my senior year, if you will, even though I technically have a BA already, I went to study in Japan, so that then I can do some, I call it clandestine travel.
And nobody's written any letters to your mom this whole time?
We have,
We have.
but there are, you can send a letter and it'd be 2 years later, a letter comes back. So there is a lot of, I call it dead silence.
Right.
Like I said, it's literally letters.
Right.
And we were told that, the government would open up the letter and they don't want people to know what's going on. Like, I couldn't write like, hey, let's say 1980. Oh, President Carter got elected and it was by popular vote. We didn't go into like the electoral college, whatever, but by popular vote, whatever. They don't want
that
Vietnamese,
kind of information getting to the Vietnamese, and growing into
right,
an idea.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you write anything like that, it's gone.
Yep.
And so if we send 10 letters, we're hoping one of them will get through.
Wow.
And if she sends 10s, we literally got 2.
And you probably don't even know if you're sending it to the right place.
Correct. But again, people have to remember this is 1978, 79, 80. Things are just not like they are now where there's a tracking number and all that stuff.
Right. Okay, so now you're in Japan.
I'm in Japan.
It's
1989.
Okay.
I got there on August 7th, 1989. Okay. I made plans over Thanksgiving weekend, which just happened. Today is obviously a few days after Thanksgiving. I flew to Hong Kong, and then I went across the border illegally. And literally, I was going to hike, take a bus. I bought a motorcycle, rode it until it broke down where I couldn't fix it anymore, couldn't put any fuel in it. And then you just keep on going. And I got to Vung Tau.
And what city is Vung Tau again?
Vung Tau is in South Vietnam.
Okay, and is that?
And Hong Kong is north of North Vietnam.
Okay.
So it took about 13 days for me to make it the trek down. if I were to do it today, I just hop on Vietnam Airline and 48 minutes later,
you're there.
I'm in Saigon.
Okay.
So by the time I got there, I remember it was Thanksgiving, 1989. I found out my mom had died roughly the end of July of 1989. So I pretty much a wreck.
Because you just missed her.
Yeah, I literally just missed her because no one really knows how she dies. People don't do like
there's no documentation,
diagnosis and whatever. She died.
Okay.
She was born 1932. This is 1989. So she was roughly 57 years old.
Okay.
Again, the records are a little sketchy.
Right.
But I remember going back to Japan, and I was living with a host family, and I cried in bed. First of all, it's a very small house. They thought I was suicidal, so they asked me to leave. So I went to a new host family and to get a fresh start. And they were very nice taking me in, but
it was rough.
That was a rough time for me. And so I never said goodbye to my mom, never get to talk to her. It was, like I said, it was bad. But with all that said, I don't think my story is, my situation is that unique because I presume with 2 million people escaping, 800,000 survivors, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of similar stories.
But it's unique to a lot of Americans who were born here,
right?
Especially in Kansas City, and I wish that more Americans had a better perspective of what happened in the past and what is going on in the world. I think there'd be more appreciation of what we have, the system that we do have. Yeah, it's not perfect.
Exactly.
But it's a system that the whole world desires to be like.
Aspire. Again, I speak to some school kids and they're like, well, why didn't you email it? Why didn't you pick up a phone call? They still don't understand the whole thing at all. But it really changes my perspective on the world and my outlook. There are a number of things that I would like to see, the Vietnamese immigrants who come here
Mm-hmm.
to do a better job. One, and this is not meant to be a political statement, but some of the older folks need to try to learn English,
Mm-hmm.
because you need to acclimate to this country, and English is a common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of them, they stay in like Low Saigon is what the common theme is. So if you live in that area, like, Westminster, which is Irvine, whatever, south of LA there, you don't have to speak English, because everyone speaks Vietnamese in those Low Saigons or whatever. Some of the Vietnamese immigrants could do a better job of assimilating.
Right.
But it's easier said than done, right? When you're 9, 10 years old, like I was, it's a lot easier for me than my father, who's 44 years old. The funny thing on that, so my dad retired, and he said, I'm going back to Vietnam, and I'm going to live there. He talked about that from the moment he got to the United States. And I'm sure because, again, high on a totem pole, he remembers those times. He doesn't remember, the bad times. About 6 months after he moved back to Vietnam, when Vietnam was okay.
What year is this?
This is 1997, 98 range. He came back to the United States and he goes, I can't live there. People don't follow rules and laws that much, you agree to something and, things are just not as orderly, which is funny because my dad always talked about moving back to Vietnam and living there, to now, after a few months of living there, he moves back to the United States and he prefers living in the United States. So that shows you that he also became Americanized to a certain extent. Vietnam now is a lot different. People forget that it's still run by a communist party. They say they're communist, but they don't behave anything like communism at all. People can fly directly into Vietnam now and stay there and go there as often as they want and all that stuff, where prior to 1995 there was really no communication. And so Vietnam is a growing country. Stock market is becoming more, I call it, disciplined. And there's a lot more Western educated Vietnamese people have moved back to start business and own enterprises, and I call it set up the American enterprise model or the European model. So Vietnam is growing, but for me, it's the people in America. It is family. This is home now, because I've been here 40 years. Literally 40 years and 5 months. So I'm pretty much an American now.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
I need to hear these things because it's really good for me individually to not take things for granted. When it's hard not to do that here. Because I don't know what the theory is called, but there's a theory that goes along with this. It goes with boredom and how there isn't struggle in 2018 like there was decades ago, and so we find little micro things to harp in on, when really the world right now is there's as few wars going on ever in recorded history, and it's hard to even think about this stuff, and that you went through it. It doesn't even. It almost seems not real.
Exactly. I mean, to a certain extent, I live a dual life. You and I play golf at Brook Ridge. It's not the poshest country club, but but it's a place we like. And sometimes we get slow play on the golf course, and we complain. And that is such a first world problem.
Yep.
So I have that going on, but you can ask my wife if a waiter brings out 3 napkins, or hey, may I have another napkin? And they bring out 3. I'll save the 2 and bring it home. She is embarrassed by the whole thing, but for me, growing up in Vietnam,
That's what you're about.
you save everything
Yeah.
and you maximize every natural resource that's there. I'm not trying to be funny about this, but in the refugee camp, you have to climb on a tree to get leaves to wipe your butt
Wow.
because that's what you got.
Wow.
So to this day, I ever see an unused napkin on a table when I leave, I take it.
Wow.
Wow. And so there is that duality of, oh man, the tea time today, why is it so slow on a golf course to, saving that. I live that every day. Just because there is a influence of my heritage to what I am somewhat accustomed to now. I work in the insurance and risk management business, and we bicker all kinds of stuff. And then I try to remember the old days of fighting for a morsel of food, sleeping on a plank of wood because the sand was so hot in the refugee camp. I still remember those things like they happened yesterday. I can feel the heat as we're talking about it right now. And then just eating, I call it 3-day-old rice, because that's what, sometimes that's all they serve, which is hard. By the way, your audience should try eating old rice. And
It's like little pebbles of
yes,
sand.
yes, it's hard. And so, but that's what you got.
Yeah.
And so you learn to exist on so little. And then to now, we're complaining about traffic, 5-minute delay in traffic, or the cable went down, or the internet or Wi-Fi isn't available, and we complain about it. I try to harken back to, I call it more humbling times in life, to dampen whatever complaints I have, now.
Well, and if your parents could see how successful you become and where it all started from, I mean, it's all worth it.
Yeah, except, as much as I want to say that, I just wish my mom was here.
Yeah.
You have
At least have one more conversation and
right,
touch her and hold her and hug her. And,
yeah. I mean, that was tough.
yeah, I can imagine. Well, I really can actually.
And so you do what you can, and but like I said, it strips to the core of how much people lose. And again, the Holocaust has its own, and you look at what the Tutsis and Hutus, what's going on, or what's going on in Yemen right now, the DRC. It's not unique, unfortunately, because you see that story over and over and over. But for me, if there are moments, it's like who you want to have dinner with, the 4 people, maybe I don't care. I just want one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah.
And I think about that, and there are times I'm like, what do I say? Part of me says, I want to say so much, but if you have a few moments, what do you say? And I would be just nothing other than just look at her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just you have a connection. Her story, I know we're going off a little bit on a tangent, but her story is also fairly unique because in 1954, Vietnam was split to become North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And that was just I guess a compromise, if you will. And her mom and her sister were going to the open air market, and so she was sent to the south end of the market to get whatever. They split up, and then the mom and sister was on the other end of the market to get whatever, and they reconverge, and then you go home and you cook the meal every day. There's not like a big fridge where we store, or a freezer where we store. And noon that day, they said, this is the line. So they put the barbed wires right in the middle of the market. She was stuck on the south end, and she couldn't go back.
Oh, wow.
And so she was 13 years old with no money no relatives, no connection, and learn to make it work. So her story is pretty rough.
Hmm.
You know, but then you go to East Germany, West Germany. That happened, right? With the walls
Hmm.
right there.
Hmm.
And then if you go to, brothers and families are split.
Hmm.
Literally right there.
Hmm.
And if you are caught on the other side of the wall or whatever, that's where you're stuck. Um, North and South Korea, same thing. So my story is not unique, but it's unique to me in the sense that
Hmm.
it's through my lens.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of these things, unfortunately, if I don't memorialize this or put
Yeah.
this on video, whatever,
Hmm.
it will be lost.
Yeah, it'll be forgotten. And I think there's real energy about getting this out there. And even if this just affects a few people,
Hmm.
um, and brings awareness, and also that you can have this forever as well.
Right.
This
Yeah.
recorded, and you can show your grandkids, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And because we're all getting into these 23andMe and we're looking way into the past now more than we ever have, and being able to have these stories, it's incredible.
Right. And my father-in-law, was raised or grew up during the Depression,
Hmm.
and so he has a completely different view. And I'm sure the they call it, Tom Brokaw calls it, the greatest generation.
Hmm.
Again, they were raised differently.
Hmm.
But I know that, my experience being a Vietnamese immigrant,
Hmm.
um, you know, I don't know how to react to it, with the current climate of immigration and all
Mhm.
that stuff,
Mhm.
because what I knew was literally that little kid
Hmm.
being not tossed around, but basically you go here, you go there,
Hmm.
and you just don't understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Other than that, you just follow what your parents or your uncles and tell you. Um, but I want to go back to one short story about a lady. Her name is Sarah Krefsky. Um, Again, she was a graduate student, and she now lives in south of Chicago in Illinois. She was 23 years old. She had to just do her thesis paper and took on a whole bunch of Vietnamese people, and she was driving an AMC Pacer, which is one of the more hideous looking cars ever made, us around to get immunized, go to school and go to doctors.
Is this your host?
And this is the lady that was basically hosting us,
Mhm.
and not so much money,
Mhm.
but just help us come to America and become like
Yeah.
socialize
Right.
us. Anyway, to this day, a lot of people are amazed that I don't ever get sick, and I've not missed a day of work
Hmm.
or a day of school because I was ill.
Hmm.
Because all these shots that I got back then, well, I would tell her. When I was a little boy in Vietnam, there were about 200 kids in school. There's a big needle and there's a big syringe and there's a pot of boiling water. And they would literally pull whatever medicine out of this vial.
Hmm.
And there's one needle, one syringe, one kid, another kid. Just keep on going until the syringe is empty. They toss it into this boiling water, but they have a secondary one, and they flake out, whatever excess water, pull some medicine again out of this vial, and just keeps on going. And so I was immunized that way. I would drink water that runs off a roof into a wooden pail, and there's a ladle you drink. You put the ladle back, and it's a public drinking fountain, and there are things, floating in there. So that's what we drank.
Right.
And you
yeah.
eat, I would call it, very unsanitary conditions.
Right.
And so to this day, when I see people doing all kinds of hand sanitizers
Yeah.
and all that stuff, I laugh because, knock on wood, since I came to the United States, I have not been sick.
Wow.
Even when my kids were little and they come home, stuffy nose, whatever it is. I kiss and hug them, and I don't get stuffy nose, and I don't get sick at all.
Wow.
So there are some good things that came from Vietnam because I was exposed to a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah.
Where, if I were to be born in America, I probably have peanut allergies and all kinds of allergies. Like, we're better at detecting a lot of these things. But I coming back to the Vietnamese people. I don't know how many there are in the United States now because of obviously families and marriages and children's and grandchildren's. But I hope some of those older generation not so to preach, but share this heritage so that the younger generation will have some appreciation. Just an idea.
Yeah.
Because at some point, like I said, whatever they think is hardship, it's a lot different than the hardship that the original refugees come from. But I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah,
and giving
Ty,
the
this has been
platform.
awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
No problem.
And I'm looking forward to getting on the course with you this spring.
Sounds good.
That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Sweet.